Welcome. Tackling harmful content online and the regulation of online safety is a high priority for IIC members around the world. We were therefore delighted to be able to catch up in conversation with two of the pioneers in this extremely important area. Julie Inman Grant, Commissioner for the eSafety Commission, Australia's independent regulator for online safety. eSafety Australia was the world's first government agency dedicated to keeping people safer online and has been led by Commissioner Grant since it began operating in 2015. And Dame Melanie Dawes, Chief Executive Board Member, Ofcom, the UK's regulator for communication services. Dame Melanie joined Ofcom in March 2020 and is currently progressing with the UK's online safety bill through Parliament. Commissioner Grant and Dame Melanie have given us a snapshot of their regulatory structures, processes and roadmaps, discussed the importance of collaboration in country and internationally, and have given us their recommendations for those looking to follow in their footsteps. The conversation is moderated by the IIC's Director of Programmes, Amanda Crabb. Welcome, Julie and Melanie.
So the tide is clearly turning in terms of online safety regulation. So Julie, perhaps you could bring us up to speed with what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Well, I'd 100% agree that the global regulatory landscape for online safety is evolving, and it's evolving in a positive direction. I think there's increasingly widespread recognition that self-regulation is not sufficient to protect citizens around the world from online harms. And of course, the online world as we know it was not built for safety. It was built for speed. But we are now at what I believe is big tech's seatbelt moment. And I have to admit, having established the eSafety Commission 7 years ago, it's been a bit of a lonely road. So we're absolutely thrilled to have the experience and the capability of Ofcom joining the fray. We've already worked really well together, and we look forward to seeing what more they do beyond the video sharing platform work that has been really splendid thus far.
Excellent. And Melanie, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, well, look, I all I can do is just take my hat off to Julie and her colleagues and what they've achieved so far. And despite the time difference, and you can see I've been the lucky one that's got the daytime recording. Julie once again is joining us from quite late at night. But the partnership's already there, and it's only going to grow and deepen across our two countries, but also with others in Europe and other jurisdictions that are coming down the line as well. And I really welcome that. This is a very early type of regulation. I think it's long overdue. We've got a lot of catching up to do. We're dealing with platforms and services that are very mature, that have extremely large numbers of users, including very large numbers of young people and even children under the age of 13 as well. So we've got a lot to fix, but I'm very confident that we can make this work and make it something that still allows for innovation and new services and doesn't actually destroy or remove the services that people love in their daily lives, but makes them safer, particularly for children and young people.
So tell us a bit more then, both of you, about the similarities and differences of approach then between Australia and the UK.
Right. Well, like I said, we were established as the Children's eSafety Commissioner back in 2015. And so we've had a lot of changes, additions of regulatory schemes, programs along the way. When I walked in the door 5.5 years ago, there were 35 people. And, I knew that, I had to learn the Australian public service very quickly. I came from 22 years in industry where I worked in safety. And within 3 months, our remit was expanded to being the eSafety Commissioner. So we, as the world's first dedicated government online safety regulator, we've kind of had to write the playbook as we go along. I think we've arrived at a model that really makes sense for our market and for our challenges. And I often talk about that model in the terms of prevention, protection, and proactive change. So this may sound strange for a regulator to say, but we're never going to regulate our way out of online harms. We really had to establish an evidence base and make sure that we are making prevention, education, and awareness, targeting different audiences, first with children, then universally, and now really focused on vulnerable communities. The first, what they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In terms of protection, we've got individual complaint schemes, which I think will differ from the approach the UK takes, but we know that too many reports of online abuse fall through the cracks. So we were set up as a safety net to advocate on behalf of Australians, young Australians that experience serious cyberbullying, all Australians that experience image-based abuse or the non-consensual sharing of intimate images and videos, adult cyber abuse, where we're really drawing the line as to where freedom of speech meets serious online abuse, which actually silences speech. And then what I call proactive and systemic change. So putting the burden back on the platforms to assess risk and build safety in at the beginning, safety by design, but also getting ahead of tech trends and challenges. So these together and all underpinned by partnerships really creates a very, very effective model. We can talk a little bit about the systemic changes that have come about as the Online Safety Act in January of this year. But we're in the midst of negotiating with industry a co-regulatory scheme around mandatory industry codes. And we also have some new transparency powers around the basic online safety expectations.
Yes, if I can just perhaps add a little bit from the UK perspective. So there's a lot in common with the regulation that's coming down the track and indeed is already in place in some areas in the UK and the Australian model. What the UK system will do is place a duty of care on the platforms to keep their users safe from various harms, and particularly illegal harms and those that can befall children on apps and services, as we know. And that's just such an important point. It's not about Ofcom as the regulator in the UK adjudicating the content. It's not really about whether the platforms are publishers. That debate isn't really the one that is important from a UK perspective. It's actually about the systems and processes that are in place and how platforms are designed. So it's more about things like age verification for adult sites to make sure that pornography isn't available to under 18s. It's about whether or not, if you're a younger user, any random person can come and contact you and direct message you, which creates huge issues and risks around child grooming. It's about the risks that attach to things like live streaming, which obviously can be part of a platform's offer, but can also raise challenges, as we know from terrible events like the live streaming of the Christchurch shooting and also the Buffalo shootings earlier this year. So it's about those kinds of design features. It's as much, in fact, more really about how content is managed and about what is fed to people through algorithms than it is about this perennial debate about whether individual content or individual users should stay up or be taken down. It's about getting very much beyond that debate into actually the design of platforms, although sometimes, of course, that's going to be what services want to do. It's actually much more about that design issues. And that's why Julie's so right. This is about prevention, a lot more prevention, so that we don't need to do so much in the moment curing of the problem when it emerges.
So in terms of what you're both working on right now, from a practical point of view, so what are the current approaches that you're taking in terms of evidence, research insights and so on that you're looking at?
Shall I start on this one, just because I'm desperate to talk about the video sharing platforms work?
Go for it.
And then I'll hand over to Julie. So
okay.
From Ofcom's perspective, although we're waiting for a bigger regulatory system, which is currently halfway through its journey in our parliament, we're already regulating 19 video sharing platforms in the UK under some EU laws, in fact, which were transposed just before Brexit. And we published our first transparency report on those 19 platforms last week. And so what I would say we've learned above all as Ofcom in the first year of this new system is the power of transparency. So until last week in the UK, it was down to the companies themselves, what we knew about their safety features. And that changed last week because you actually have the first report from a regulator using transparency and information gathering powers that actually sets out the reality using our statutory powers. And it's been very interesting. Just by using that transparency regime, we've actually got some change already. We've got the first UK-based adult site to introduce proper age verification at aged 18, which is a great step. And we need to see that now across the whole global industry, particularly around pornography. And we've also seen some new parental controls on Snapchat. We've seen TikTok introduce new filtering systems for younger users and the content they see. So it's just the beginning, but the power of transparency is a chance actually for companies to tell us what they're doing, and for us in a way to benchmark that with their competitors. But it's also a place where companies will be held to account on behalf of the public. Accountability and transparency, those are our watchwords. Julie?
Right. No, it's wonderful to see all these contrasting approaches and where there are intersections. I feel like there's a big puzzle and we're putting the pieces together. And so I would agree in terms of, we're taking different approaches. And I would say that the individual complaint schemes that we run, I neglected to mention the online content scheme, where we've done 72,000 investigations around child sexual abuse material, pro-terrorist content, and also have powers around abhorrent violent content in the wake of the Christchurch tragedy, in terms of stopping the virality of what we call online content events. One of the things that the individual complaint schemes do give us is we're working directly with the Australian public. So we're seeing trends as they happen, we're capturing them. Online harm can manifest at a societal level, but it also can be very targeted and reach at the individual level. So from my personal perspective, I think that's one of the most valuable things that I feel we do at eSafety is take down that content. It also gives us a lot of insights as to how the different platforms, how effectively they're working on a day-to-day basis, how their trust and safety teams, are they really enforcing their policies? How much is falling through the cracks? Where do the systemic challenges really lie? Are they really tackling issues like recidivism, where bad actors can return to the platform? And what we hope to do, so that's just one set of insights that we will be using to inform the work that we do around the systems and process reforms. And I would 100% agree with Melanie around the importance of what I call radical transparency, because I think what we're all finding is that the transparency has been much more selective. And so we have just issued 7 legal notices to 7 major platforms, including Microsoft, Skype, Meta, WhatsApp, Apple, Snap, and Omegle, which is known as a real playground for predators. And this is to ask them basic questions about what they are and are not doing to proactively detect child sexual exploitation material, whether it's images, whether it's grooming technologies, or whether it's detecting videos, particularly in live streaming. We're in the process of getting that information together, but I think, again, this will give us certain pieces of the puzzle, just like Ofcom's work around the video sharing platforms did, and their report really was excellent and gave us some great insights. So as we piece all this information together and continue to work together, I think these insights will be important. And back to one of Melanie's earlier points, we're taking on some of the largest, richest, most powerful companies in the world. We do need to work together to counter the wealth, the stealth, and the power of these companies. And we really need to do more to lift safety standards across the board, because we need to minimize the threat surface for the future. And I didn't answer your question at all about research, but investigative insights are important. And I can certainly talk to you a little bit about some of the more interesting stats that we're seeing, particularly around what children are experiencing online and what their parents think they're experiencing online. There's a little bit of a digital disconnect there.
I can imagine. Yes, well, I was going to ask about. I mean, I guess you've both got a roadmap that you've got your benchmarks that you're setting out. So it'd be interesting, I think, to hear a bit more about that and what might be coming next that you can tell us about.
Yeah, so from the UK perspective, we published a roadmap from Ofcom in July. Obviously, our legislation is still going through Parliament. I'm very confident the new government is going to be taking this forward, and we're recording this just after our new Prime Minister has walked into Downing Street, but I'm very confident it will come through. So we set out as the regulator what companies need to do and by when, and in the spring we will launch the first batch of our consultations on how we will expect systems and processes to be thought through from a perspective of illegal harms like terrorist material, child sexual abuse material, and so on. And then that will be followed by specific codes on children and what's appropriate for under 18s. And also critically, risk assessments. That's a very central part of the UK system, the requirement on companies to conduct a risk assessment and to look at the overall features on their service, like live streaming, like direct messaging, like who are their users, do they mix children and adults together, for example, which creates additional risk. They will need to address all those things and then answer the question about how they've designed their service to mitigate those risks in different ways. So that's all coming down the line. But meanwhile, we will continue to do, just to pick up Julie's research point, research has always been a very strong part of what Ofcom has done as a regulator. And we've now got a 6,500 panel survey of UK users to really shine light on different perspectives. And Julie's absolutely right. You get a very different view from kids and adults, but you also get some real differences between men and women. Men are more likely to see disinformation and fraud. Women are more likely to experience bullying, content like, self-harm and suicide material, stuff that actually makes them not want to go online and can really affect their sense of being able to have their voices heard as a user of social media. So that research, that real understanding of where people are coming from and what they experience is a very important part of how we will then hold the industry to account by shining a light on that at a level of true kind of proper intuitive understanding of the general public and their views.
And Julie, tell us a bit more about your sort of next steps and also the research element as well, which I think you had more to add on that.
Sure. No, that's great. Thank you so much. Well, earlier this year, we released our new strategy from 2022 to 2025, which really sets out how we'll prioritize our activities over the next few years to help Australians have safer and more positive experiences online. And this just gives us a longer term view in terms of how e-safety will counter online harms, and will consider issues like existing and emerging technologies, evolving harms, and international developments. And I think it's really important what Melanie said about risk assessments and duty of care, which are really hallmarks of their scheme. We do the same things. We talk about it a little bit differently. We initially took on something called the Safety by Design initiative as a voluntary initiative where we sat down with 180 different organizations to develop principles, which again are very much aligned with both UK and Australian law around what is service provider responsibility, what does user empowerment and autonomy look like, and what does real effective transparency and accountability look like. But because we know that there's a little bit of principles fatigue out there, there are principles for pretty much everything. Principles are only effective when they're implemented. So we took another 18 months and we did a lot of this again with industry to surface up best practice about how wicked issues have been tackled and how innovation can be used to invest in safety protections and solutions. And we came up with 2 sets of interactive risk assessment tools, one for startups which was much more lightweight, and one for mid-tier and media and enterprise customers. And those have now been downloaded and used in 46 countries. And we really see that as an enablement tool for industry, again, to identify the risks, identify the shortcomings, to understand the harms that exist, and actually to understand how these types of platforms can be weaponized or exploited so that they can plug those holes, and really to lift standards across the way. And safety by design is really important, not in terms of just today, but in terms of tomorrow. And part of our research and what I'd call our future focused trend work and engagement has to do with understanding how emerging technologies can can provide benefits, but how they can also be risky, and how our citizens can mitigate the risks. So we started with deep fakes. We've covered everything from anonymity to identity theft, to end-to-end encryption, and most recently around immersive technologies and decentralization, or the Web 3.0 world. And if anybody tells you they know what the metaverse is going to look like, don't believe them, because I think that's really evolving. And I don't think we can start thinking about regulating these really complex environments, whether they involve algorithms or haptic suits and wearables and AR and VR glasses, until we know what that world looks like. But one thing that we can do to hold the architects of these new worlds, hold their feet to the fire, is to make sure that they are employing both a duty of care, but they're designing these new technology paradigms with safety by design in mind.
From the IRC's point of view, I know that we are very interested to hear how regulatory cooperation works, both within country and at an international level. So I'd be really interested to hear, particularly bearing in mind that we're going to be sharing this video as part of our major international events next week. It would be lovely to hear how your thoughts are developing in terms of that, and what sort of cooperation you're already seeing, what you're hoping for, which other countries are aligned with you. Who wants to start with that?
Can I start on that one? I mean, I just to say first, I mean, cooperation inside countries is incredibly important as well. So in the UK, we've set up our what we call our Digital Regulators Cooperation Forum, which brings together our Competition Authority, our Privacy and Data Authority, and then Ofcom as the online safety regulator, actually also with our financial services regulator, so that we really can look across, make sure that we are actually pro-innovation and aren't stifling smaller companies from innovating as we work together, but also so that we can look into some of the big new issues, like how do you audit algorithms, for example. Let's ask that question once together and then apply it to our various regimes. So that's very important, is that internal, if you like, in-country cooperation. But on external kind of global cooperation, I cannot really emphasize enough how central I think this has to be for all of us. And we published in the UK a report a couple of weeks ago on the Buffalo shootings in New York. And a lot of people in the UK were like, why are you publishing a report on that? And the answer is, we regulate already Twitch, where that was live streamed. Now, Twitch took it down really quickly, actually, within 2 minutes once the shooting started. It was obviously such a terrible set of events, and so resonant of previous, for many people, of previous atrocities as well. But if you read our report, what we really looked into was not just the live streaming, but actually also, the features and safety issues around platforms that actually allow radicalization to occur, how people actually develop their narratives and share them online. Also then how he chose that platform to live stream on and not another one that was dependent on the particular safety features. And then actually how it was, whether the hashing technologies worked well enough and the international protocols that are now in place, whether they worked well enough to then prevent that material from being disseminated more widely. And the answer is that they worked okay, but not well enough. And so everything in that report has got an international lens, whether it's about international regulatory cooperation, but also actually some of the very important industry agreements, such as GIFCT and Tech Against Terrorism, that by their very nature have to be global, and which we as regulators will want to continue to work with. So, It's incredibly important. And the last thing we want actually is to be imposing slightly different standards on every single platform, where we can align and actually have the same standard of, say, age verification, and understand what the software is, what the systems are, which ones work, which ones meet sufficient standards. If we can agree that once globally, actually that is helpful to the services that we're trying to support here, but it is particularly helpful for innovation. I think it means we don't stifle off smaller businesses coming along and trying to enter this market. It's hard enough for them already, given the dominance of some of the bigger companies.
Julie?
Yeah, I think that's right. We do tip our hats to the UK, and we formed our own Australia working group called DP Reg. It's all of the digital regulators, the ACMA, the communications regulator, the e-safety commissioner, the ACCC, which is our competition and consumer authority, as well as the OAIC, our information and privacy commissioner, to make sure there is end-to-end regulatory, I guess, really a situational awareness, and so that we're working together on a number of these issues, and that has also been very effective. It's interesting that Melanie mentioned Buffalo, because again, I think we're all going to have slightly different approaches depending on the priorities of our government, the current regulatory schemes that we have. But one thing that's consistent, if you're not a regulator that's domiciled in the United States, where the vast majority of the major platforms are, we are going to have all have an extraterritorial reach. We've had strong laws in place for about 22 years around hosting of illegal content. So virtually all of the regulatory targets that we have, whether they're image boards or gaming platforms or device manufacturers or social media sites, are all domiciled overseas. And so our approach with Buffalo, and it's evolved. Since we had new powers given to us in the wake of Christchurch, and so every time there's been a terrorist event, since 2019, frankly, it always seems to happen over the weekend. We're checking our feeds, we're doing our investigations across the globe. The first time that Twitch was really weaponized was around the Halle, Germany attack. And it wasn't tackled as quickly. So I agree with Melanie. I think Twitch learned a lot during that time. They really updated their systems. And what we realized as e-safety at that time was that because so many of the big players who had more resources and much more mature trust and safety systems in place and were part of GIFCT, anybody who wanted to achieve a certain degree of virality and not have it shut down midstream quickly was going to use one of these mid-tier sites. So at that point, we started trying to identify what all those live streaming and video sharing platforms might be and start building the relationships and the escalation paths then. So what we were able to do when Buffalo happened was we issued removal notices to 8 different overseas websites in relation to the shooter's manifesto, as well as the videos of the attack. And that immediately resulted in content taking down from 4 major core sites. Then we were able to follow up by issuing informal requests for links to be removed from search engines and to issue a notice seeking link deletion. And this was successful in having the content scrubbed from both Google and Bing search results in Australia. So that was our way of at least trying to restrain really open, easy access. Of course, people can use VPNs to be able to access the content if they really want to. But this is horrific content that people can't unsee. So we do want to restrict that to the extent we can. And again, I think all of our processes will be evolving. The company's processes, they will learn, and part of our role as regulators is to make sure that we do, again, hold their feet to the fire and make sure that they're responding rapidly and evaluating. And absolutely, international cooperation is is critical. And we can't say too much now, but we've certainly looked at the privacy commissioners and the Global Privacy Assembly, and of course the IIC, which has been around for so long. They're really, until now, there hasn't been a critical mass of online safety regulators that we could really convene, but we're really excited that we'll be able to talk more about a formal structure around a global online safety regulators network that will be talking about at FOSI in DC to provide more details then.
That sounds great, and I think for a lot of the regulators that are going to be with us next week at the IRF, at the International Regulators Forum, who are thinking about this, but frankly probably don't know where to start. I wondered whether you had, if you could each give your sort of top 3 things they should think about, or what do they need to have in place first? Would you have any kind of tips for them? It's a bit of a tough question, but any insights that will be useful for somebody that really wants to get this moving?
Well, look, I would say, firstly, you're not alone. There are other regulators globally increasingly in this space. So come and talk to us, because it is really difficult. We are all catching up, but the momentum is growing and we are stronger and can achieve more and do it in a way that supports businesses if we act together. So that's my first tip. My second tip is, understand your users, invest in research. Your own public will be different from the UK public or the Australian public. So I think that's incredibly important. And when you have that research and you really understand what people think, it gives you a power and a voice to be able to take to the companies and say, no, but this is actually what people think who are on your services in our country. And then I think thirdly, I do believe the system and process approach is right. And I think there's a lot of debate in the UK about whether or not we should have user complaints in the way that Julie has in the Australian context. I think, there are plenty of people who would say that we should, but I would say as the regulator, even if we did have that, I would always still want to be thinking mainly about systems and processes. And actually, when you boil it down, it isn't like that complicated. Who is allowed onto the platform? How are they allowed to interact with each other? What do the algorithms feed them? Whether it's about content or whether it's about the people they connect them with as well, which is increasingly important in the context of metaverse. So these issues are not, it's not rocket science. It just hasn't been thought through properly up until now. And actually, we can all help each other if we work together.
Julie, any thoughts?
Listen, we've spent a lot of time doing capacity building and being very honest about what has worked and what has not. So we spent a lot of time talking to different governments. It depends on what the priority of the government is, what the current infrastructure and policy and regulatory environment is, the appetite for risk and innovation. I don't think you can be a small traditional regulator in the online safety space. And that was one of the first things I did, was to try and respect the structure of the Australian Public Service, but create something that was much more nimble and innovative so we could pivot. Technology is always going to outpace policy and regulation. And if you don't keep pace, then you're always going to be playing a game of whack-a-mole or whack-a-troll, whatever you decide to do. So, and we had to do a lot of experimentation to kind of land at our model around prevention, protection, and proactive change, and the partnerships, and decide how to weigh those different things. And in some of our conversations with different governments, Ireland was really grappling with, do we just do systems and processes, or do we do individual complaint schemes as well? And I won't speak for them. I think that they're going to start with systems and processes, but they had very strong feedback from their advocacy community to have individual complaint schemes. So they're currently assessing how they might grandfather those in or bring them in over time. And I have to say, since you are meeting in Canada, it was really the Canadians that made me appreciate, it's been kind of hard being the first mover and not being able to have a playbook to follow and kind of writing that playbook as we go along. But what they said to us was, you're so lucky you started 7 years ago. You may not have had innovative growth, but you've had a lot of runway to build trust as the Children's e-Safety Commissioner, running the online content scheme and having cyberbullied, and you've layered on these different schemes and these different programs. You know, they're coming at this issue of online safety, and there's just so many massive issues to tackle. I think that's what can kind of be overwhelming. I really admire the process the Canadians have taken in terms of forming an expert group and really listening to a lot of different voices. And I look forward to seeing where they end up. But again, we welcome more countries into the fray with the Digital Services Act. And accountable authorities coming on board there, with New Zealand and Singapore and other companies looking at online harms regulator. You know, in 5 to 10 years, we will have a global network of online safety regulators, and this may not be novel. That's the hope.
That's a very positive note to end on, I think. Thank you both very much indeed for giving us all your insights. And I know there'll be lots of discussion about this in Ottawa at our events, which are coming up very soon. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Melanie. Really appreciated. And we'll see you soon.
Amanda.